You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality. Not that it is.
Hi, I'm Kevin. Thanks for joining me. I hope the day's treating you well, and thanks for taking me along with you for this next little bit. I'm grateful. You know, with No Schedule Man, we say no plan is all part of the plan. Sometimes things change and they don't go quite how we think they should go or how we think they're going to go. And this conversation with my pal Jim Cressman is further evidence of that. I also like to say that, the journey is the destination. That's part of what No Schedule Man is all about. And I love exploring the journeys of the people that join us on this podcast because no matter what their path, it seems like there's something to learn from everyone, and this is no exception. I was actually surprised by how much I didn't know about Jim. And that's one of the things I love most about doing this show because it forces my attention into the present, to really listen to what the other person is saying and to explore each idea as it comes along. You think you know somebody well, but then when you actually sit down to really talk and really listen to them, I end up anyway surprised at how much I learned. So as far as today's guest, Jim Cressman, he's a professional baseball umpire and a retired sports writer. Now, Jim still umpires and has been doing that for over 50 years. More about that in just a second. I know Jim best as a sports writer. For decades, he covered sports for the London Free Press, which is the daily paper in the city where he and I live. He was responsible for all kinds of topics, including the London Tigers baseball team that we had here in this town for a few years. They were a double-A affiliate. It's a minor league affiliate of the major league team, the Detroit Tigers, which has always been my favorite team, and is Jim's too, I think. He also did a lot of coverage on the London Knights hockey team of the Ontario Hockey League, all kinds of major league sporting events, and even auto racing coverage out at the stock car track near here called Delaware Speedway, which is where I worked in various capacities for about a decade, and that's where I got to know Jim best. And that's just a high-level overview of some of the stuff that Jim covered. If it was in the sporting world, Jim was probably there over the course of his career. Now, listening to him talk about how they used to get stories written and submitted is really a whole lot of fun, I thought anyway, because we become so used to things the way that they are now, but it wasn't always this way. When we were carrying around little computers, and we called them phones. We were only a few years into the internet existing when I would have first met Jim, so I've always kind of wondered how he managed that before some of those technologies came along. And if you've got any interest at all in news media, journalism, or reporting, you're going to love what he has to say in answer to some of those questions. Now, as far as his umpiring work, that, on the other hand, took Jim to the Olympics, to other international events, as well as through baseball's minor leagues. Had work visas been more readily available, Jim may never have been a sports writer to begin with, because he likely would have ended up as an umpire at the major league level in Major League Baseball. Now, we'll never know that for sure, but we do talk about that. I've always been curious about people who are capable of thriving in an environment like that, like being an umpire or a referee, because that's the kind of role where you would absorb so much negativity so often. People are just shouting and spitting and screaming venom at you. I've always kind of wondered what makes a person want to do that. Well, Jim has some answers, and we discussed that too. Some of the key steps in the journey from Jim that I took away from my time with him include, number one, perspective. You may hear it said, life is an illusion. The more that I explore this, the more I think that that's true, because whatever it is in life, whatever the experience, whatever the thing, it's all seen through different perspectives, yours and mine and someone else's, and no two people see things exactly the same way. So whether it's writing on a topic or an event, or umpiring. So giving an opinion on what happened, it still all comes down to perspective. The perspective of the writer, the perspective of the reader, the perspective of the participant in the game, or the official, in this case umpire. And the more I think about this, the more interested I become in exploring that idea. But perspective, that really came up to me in this conversation with Jim. Number 2, how what you love most stays with you. You know, I'm going to go back to where I started here. I thought of Jim, and think of Jim, I guess, as a sports writer. And yet it becomes evident right from the very first question that was not his first love. And I'm almost embarrassed to say I didn't know that. I knew he umpired, but I didn't realize that things went the way that they did in his career. And I'll let him tell that story. But he doesn't do the writing anymore, and I've always been kind of interested as to why, and we talk about that. But he does still umpire. He loves that the most, and that stayed with him. And I think if you think about your own life, the things that you're really passionate about, that you really feel deep down in your soul, they just keep bubbling back up and throwing themselves in front of you and into your path. And I think that's interesting. No matter what it is that we love, what we love most does stay with us. Number 3, the value of being there, and what I'm going to call the art of human connection. Maybe you could even just call it presence. You know, so when I continue to badger Jim as a friend, how can it be possible that he hasn't written a book with all the stories that he has? Or why no blog now, or any of these kinds of things? Why doesn't he want to write? And a really clear idea of that came out for me in this conversation, is that I got the sense that Jim loved being there. And loves being there. And although he doesn't write about sports anymore, as you'll hear, he's involved in a lot of other different kinds of things that allows him to really be a part of experiencing, well, the experience the experience. But that's kind of what it is, isn't it? Is that the whole idea of being there and being a part of it, and you know, seeing not just or not just hearing the words or getting the quote, but seeing the body language and the triumph and the disappointment and all of that kind of stuff. There's a real art to that. And I got to admit, I hadn't really thought about that before as it related to something like sports writing, but that really came out to me in this conversation with Jim. I've known him for at least 15 years. And as I said, I was surprised by how much I didn't know. And that's evidenced right from the jump. So a couple things I wanted to point out before I turn this over to the conversation that I had with Jim. Right near the beginning, I asked him about umpiring or baseball. What I meant to say was umpiring or sports writing. And sometimes this used to happen in my radio days as well. The things that are coming out of your mouth don't necessarily make it to your ears. I didn't hear myself say that. And anyway, I wanted to clarify that. And I also don't know that I did a very good job when I was talking about the sports writing industry. When I said that it was alive and well, I don't think I made it clear that I meant writing as opposed to newspapers. I wouldn't want to be in the newspaper industry these days. But there are all kinds of writers with interesting things to say who found their audiences and are thriving in today's day and age, and with the technology and the platforms that are available. I've always sort of wondered what things might look like for Jim if the prime of his career had been a part of this era. And we discussed that and a lot more, but I wanted to just clarify that I really meant in that question more the writing aspect than the newspaper aspect, and I don't think I made that clear to Jim, so I apologize to him for that. But this was a whole lot of fun. We cover a lot of different territory, and as I mentioned, if you have any interest in news media or journalism at all, or if you just like good stories, settle in and pour yourself a cup of coffee or a cold glass of ice water or whatever you like the most, and enjoy. Here's my conversation with Jim Cressman on the No Schedule Man podcast. Jim, how do you think your career might have been different if you were to start now as opposed to when you did?
Woo. Well, which I guess the first question I have to ask is which career? Because initially umpiring was my career. The London Free Press, the sports reporter, was the kind of the come along after the baseball thing had been derailed. So it depends, I guess, which you want to start with. If you want to start with the baseball, because that looked like that was going to be my career for X number of years.
Umpiring or baseball?
Well, the umpiring portion of umpiring baseball.
Let's come back to that.
Okay.
Sports writing is one of the more immediate things that I think about just because of the time that we spent together in various pursuits. Yeah. And that industry is still very much alive, but doesn't look a whole lot like probably how it did when you first got into it.
It's, you say alive, but I don't know. I think print itself is really on life support, and we're just seeing that right here in London with what's going on at the London Free Press. But how it's changed, well, I guess the first thing is, the number of people involved. When I first started at the Free Press in March of '76, there was like 16 people that were involved in the sports department. Now, 2 or 3 of those were copy editors, doing the layout. They weren't actually out reporting anymore. But now I'd say you'd be hard pressed to find that many reporters, including everybody, like whether it's the entertainment section, sports, news department at the Free Press, whether there's that many left in the newsroom. I've never really sat down and counted, but the numbers have certainly dwindled. The business itself, we had a lot more time back in those days to really develop a story. I still remember my first major story with a byline is I did a big feature on an umpire. Well, he was actually a former baseball player, and he'd actually played back in the Negro Leagues. Jimmy Wilkes, who was from Philadelphia, came up touring with one of the Negro League teams to Brantford, fell in love with the city. The next season, the Brantford Red Sox of the Intercounty, now this is going way back, asked him if he would come there and play for them. Well, he ended up playing with them. Then he got into umpiring. And so when I started at the Free Press, I was umpiring at the time, of course, and I still am. I was 26 at the time actually 25, then I turned 26. But I pitched the idea to the sports editor, John Vormitag, about doing a story on Jimmy Wilkes, who was quite well known because of the London Majors or Pontiacs, whatever they were back then in the Intercounty. And Jimmy had played here, and then, of course, he was always coming in as umpiring. And he was a great story to tell. But I spent a few hours talking to him. Then I spent a few hours working on the story. So it was probably over the course of 2 or 3 days that I developed this full page feature on him. Nowadays, it's like you got an hour to pick up the phone, and going out and talking to people. That's how you get your best stories, because you just sit there, you kind of shoot the breeze, and things develop from there. But now, you pick up the phone, you get a few quotes, you write your story, and it's over with. Move on to the next story, because again, there's so few people working that they got to fill the paper, so they're just pumping out stories. So you don't have that time to really develop those people, the features. And I always remember when I started at the paper, Dave Langford was just a young reporter at the time, and he gave me the best advice. He said, don't write about games, write about people. So I always did that when I went out to cover a game. I would write about the people, to find the guy that scored the 2 goals or something like that, or just something from that game, to write about the person, because the people who were at the game already saw the game. People who weren't at the game probably don't care how the game went, but they still might want to read something about it. So that's for 10 years of high school hockey. I wrote about the kids. And then 19 years of covering the London Knights, I wrote about the players. Something that you and I know quite well, when I covered Delaware Speedway, I would write about a driver. A lot of times I'd go down, because of the deadlines on a Friday night, I would go down into the pits at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, find somebody that was doing well that year, or just kind of ask some questions, like, who's a good story or something like that. But then as I got to know other drivers, I heard the stories, and I knew who was a good story. And you'd write the story, and then you'd just hope like heck they would win the feature. Well, usually you talk about the Sports Illustrated curse, where Sports Illustrated would put somebody on the front cover like a phenom, and then they just go bust. Well, for a while there with me, drivers were coming up to me when I come down to the pits, and they go, "Hey, write about me," because I was on a pretty good run there for a while. That whoever wrote about either won the feature or came in second or third, but at least they were on the podium, that sort of thing. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. But then there's all the periphery stuff like decline in circulation. I know when I started at the paper, Saturday circulation was around 115,000 copies. Daily paper was around 90,000. That has now dropped to weekdays. I hear it's below 50,000, and on Saturdays maybe a little over 50,000. But that's going on across the industry, and I think print is going to have to find a way to redefine itself. It's trying to go online, but they haven't convinced the advertisers that that's the way to go, because at least if you got something to hold in your hand and you see that ad, you can carry that ad with you all day. You can take the paper with you. You go to that. You go follow through on. You saw an ad in the paper you want to buy or at least investigate. Where when it's online, you look at the story, the ad pops up, the ad's gone. So I don't know how print is going to survive. I know I'm just a funny little story. I still get the paper. I'm lucky as a retiree. I get it for free. But going online for me, I haven't found a way yet, first thing in the morning, to take my espresso and my laptop into the library, if you know what I mean when I say library, and balance it on my knee and read the newspaper. So at least if I got it in my hand, it's a little different.
So you're not an iPad or an e-reader guy?
I do. There is some stuff, and I will check every once in a while to see what's happening. If I want a quick news hit during the day, like I'll go on the various media sites, because you can get the instant news that way. But when I want a little more in depth on something, I want to be able to have that paper in my and I like to look at the ads. No.
Well, I was thinking, you came across my mind the other day, just with what you're saying about being there and talking about people, where I had heard on a radio program when the Florida Panthers of the NHL hockey team, for those that don't follow that, had fired their coach a couple of weeks ago, and that there was no beat reporter there because it happened on the road. I don't know what city they were in, but there was no one there to cover it. And so it's almost more, I guess, how do you measure the value of that personal interaction as it translates to the story and then to the reader? And are we becoming less connected with those personal stories? Because I guess I might argue that we've got more and it's not an argument, but an observation, more information out there and available than ever, but maybe we're compromising on the quality of it a little bit.
Oh, I totally agree. Well, because like back when I covered the London Knights, I was 19 years on that beat, and I did other stories. There was other things during the week that I would do on occasion. But usually you would find me out at the old London Gardens, or then when they moved into the John Labatt Center, Budweiser Gardens. I was there. I was at practices, because that's how you find out what's going on. That's how you develop that rapport with the players. I used to travel with the team. I was on the bus, and then things developed eventually where it became almost impossible to go on the bus after the Hunters took over, because they always wanted to get out of the rink quickly. You had to do your story. You just didn't have time. So I just started driving, and that was a lot easier, except in some of the snowstorms coming home from Owen Sound. I don't know how I made it home. But so when you're around the players, you gain their confidence, and they will tell you some stuff and give you stories and just open up a little bit more to you when you want to do that. But also too now with just the Free Press, for example, they have two reporters, sports, Ryan Payette and Morris Delacosta. Ryan's main job is the Knights. Morris's main job is London Lightning and in Western. And it's just they don't go on the road as much anymore with the team. But now too, also with Post Media, because some of these other newspapers, they are Post Media papers. They're in the chain, so they'll get them to write the story for the Free Press. But now even with the deadlines, 9:30 at night is deadline for sports. Well, the games aren't over at 9:30, so that's why you're not seeing game stories anymore. But it's just, and expenses, that sort of thing. I always remember driving over to Erie, Pennsylvania to cover the Knights. Free Press doesn't go there anymore. What they'll do is they'll watch it online, because they've got that online stuff, the scoring and all that they can follow, and they'll write a story sitting at their dining room table or something. I know Morris has done that with the London Lightning when they've gone on the East Coast trip out in Halifax and the games out there. He'll just sit at his dining room table and actually, because they got the podcast now or the webcast of the games in that league, so he just watches it, writes a story, calls the coach on his cell phone, gets a couple quotes, and there the story's done. But it's not the same as being there, because you're not getting the same reaction from the players. But it has become a lot less personal. But you even mentioned that about the National Hockey League. There's papers in the States now that don't go on the road with the team. They'll watch it on TV, and they may do the same thing. They'll just call the coach because they have a cell phone and it's all set up. They'll give them a call to do a story that way. But you're not getting the same. There's nothing like being in a dressing room after a game or down in the pits after a race. Well, especially if it's been an emotional night at the raceway.
We never had any of those, did we?
No. Yeah. It's not like being there to see the fist fly.
Well, it's interesting that to keep not so much with like a local racetrack, but you mentioned the NHL, or I'm thinking about Major League Baseball is awash with cash, and the National Basketball Association has just this ridiculous TV deal, and we all know in the United States the obsession that they have with their little militaristic pigskin game that they've got going on down there and the dollars involved. So on one hand, you've got this massive influx of money on one end, and then on the other end, from the area that you're describing, here we have people whose livelihoods had been to have kind of an intimate knowledge of that particular group that's kind of either eroding or eroded, and yet we feel maybe, or some of us feel like we've got more access than ever because we can follow along with players or coaches in 140-character tweets or something, but it's not... I don't want to make it sound like we're get off my lawn guy, because you don't strike me that way either, at least not as it relates to this. Because I don't hear you telling me that you're adverse to technology, but just that we feel like we've sort of lost or are losing a little piece of our soul and a connection, and to really bring maybe a richer picture and image of what actually the subtext of all of it that we used to, that we're maybe not so much anymore. Is that fair to say? Well,
yeah, because every game now, every game of every sport is on television.
Yeah.
You got to pay for it, but most people... the best $210 I ever spent last summer after I got my new TV package and I finally got into the 21st century, and I went out and bought LED TVs and the big screen, the whole bit. I bought the Major League package.
Yeah.
And it was awesome to be able to watch. There's other teams besides the Toronto Blue Jays. And nothing against the Blue Jays, but they're not my team. Like, I grew up, as a Tigers fan, because London, Detroit was 2 hours away. Toronto didn't come along until 1977. Well, I was 27 years old then. I was already from 12 years old. I was a Detroit Tigers fan. Yeah. So now I get to watch there. But it's great to watch these other teams and other broadcasters. Like this past season, I stayed up late nights. LA Dodgers, when they were at home, I wanted to listen to Vin Scully, knowing that this was Vin's last season.
Yeah.
So, but again, you're getting the game, but you're not getting the post-game stuff there. Sure, they do the coaches' press conference afterwards, the game, and they'll interview some players, but it's not the same quotes, because whenever they're in front of a camera and a microphone, their players and coaches are kind of guarded, and sometimes coaches just say it was a great college, or it was a great National Hockey League game played by two great National Hockey League teams, because they don't want to tick off the other team and say something. But when you go into the dressing room, you have access to the players after the game, and you can develop. You got a little bit of time, but again, that's the deadlines have killed that too. I remember back when I first started covering the London Knights, I didn't have to have a story until 11:30 at night. Well, then it became 11. Then it became 10:30. Well, with the 7:30 puck drop, man, you were scrambling. Sometimes you'd write a story on the game as soon as the game was over, send it in, so go in first edition. Then you had time to go down, run down to the dressing room for 10 minutes, get a few quotes, get back up, plug the quotes into your story, and that was it. You didn't have time to really develop that. But I think people still want to hear from the players and things like that, and I think that's where the print media, in whatever form it will take, whether it's print or online or whatever, is still important, because they can develop those. Because radio or TV interviews are 30, 40 seconds, and that's it. Especially on newscast, sportscasts, they got to move on to the next topic. I know a guy who does some stuff for what was the old Canoe sports website, and he had been in newspaper writing, but he said it's so great when you're online, because you could write 40 inches and nobody cares. Some people might only read 10 inches. Some people might read all 40 inches of that. When you're writing for a newspaper, you get basically 15, 16 inches, and that's it. There's just no more space. So, but I think it's really print is still trying to find itself on where they're going with this. But we've seen, and it's going to happen in Canada, we've seen big papers in the U.S. That have gone to just weekend. And the only reason they've stayed with that big Sunday newspaper is because the advertisers want, because they have all their inserts on the Sunday, all the sales and all that sort of stuff, all those big stores down in the U.S., because we've seen that happen in New Orleans with the Times-Picayune, which was one of the great papers. They've gone to just weekend only. Cleveland Plain Dealer has done the same thing. All the rest of the time, it's online. Well, I think you're going to see that happen in Canada, and I just don't know what the pushback is going to be from when the public when that happens. But I don't have a solution. Thank goodness I'm not in the business anymore.
Well,
I've been out for 5 years, but I sit back and I just look at it and go, oh my God. But you were even talking about the technical stuff, and I've never pushed against technical because when I started, it was still you ran to the phone and dictated to somebody back at the office.
I was just going to ask how you did that, as naive as this probably sounds, how you did that pre-internet, how you even filed the story.
You had a notebook and a piece of paper or a pen, and you wrote your story either longhand in your notebook, or if you had to take a little portable typewriter and you could be banging it out. But I found just writing it longhand was a lot easier. You had to get to a phone or have a phone in the press box, but a lot of times, even back when I started in the OHL, that was one of my biggest fights, getting phone lines, and then also now getting data lines in the press box, which now is mandatory in all the arenas. And of course now it's all Wi-Fi, so you didn't have to worry about that. But yeah, so it started out where you would go to a phone, dictate to somebody back at the Free Press, and then we started out with a thing that was called a teleram, and it was like a telecopier. And this is interesting. The guy that did it, he and his brother, Gord and Bob Stellick. Well, Gord Stellick went on to be the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs for a little while under Harold Ballard. But that's another, I'll tell you a quick story about Gord Stellick quickly. I was down covering, John Vormatag had sent me down to Maple Leaf Gardens on a Saturday night to cover, we didn't have a Sunday, Free Press didn't publish Sundays. They eventually did, then they got rid of it. So it was just a feature for the Monday paper. Well, there was Gord Stellick sitting up in the press box, and he was assistant, I don't know what he was, assistant GM or whatever, he was working for Ballard at the time. But his brother Bob was doing PR, but they'd gotten, I'll back up. We would type out our story on a piece of paper, hand it to them, they'd put it on this thing with a drum, it would go into a phone line, and it would spin, and somehow it would come out at the other end at the newspaper. All the papers used their services. It was called CanFax. And and they would get it there. Then somebody there would have to input it into the system and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, so I'm at the Leaf game. And so there's Gord Stellick. And I said to Gord, come here, sit down with me. I want to interview you. He says, about what? I said, I'm going to promote you as the next general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this, I think, was in November, whatever the year it was. It was in November. Well, that March, after the OHL season was over, I took a trip to Jamaica. We're sitting in the bar, and I'm looking up at the TV, and there was no sound, but it was a Leaf game. And, of course, the intermission. Then all of a sudden, there's a picture of Gord Stellick, and underneath it says, new Leafs general manager. Well, all the Toronto media that I knew were all coming to me afterwards. Why were you interviewing Gord Stellick? I said, well, I'm just saying he's going to be the next general manager of the Leafs. And they all laughed and stuff like that. Well, I had them get a hold of me after that, say, how did you know? I said, I just took a wild guess because, Harold Ballard he was kind of crazy.
A little kooky, yeah.
I think he's reincarnated in Donald Trump, but let's not even go there. But yeah, so that was probably the greatest scoop I ever had without it really being a scoop. So anyway, yeah, so then it would advance to another type of a computer. It looked like a big bread box that you would put you put the phone, actually have the old, the cradle phone. You'd put the phone into these couplers things, and you push a button, and you'd hope like heck that the story would go through without any power surge or anything like that. And there had to be 5 or 6 or 7 different reincarnations of these machines until they finally got to the small little laptops. But now, I remember one night at Delaware, the race was going late, but it was a big race. I can't remember which one it was. And I thought, I'm not going to have time to go down onto the track, get some quotes, get back up to the tower, to the press box, to send it in. So I thought, hey, I've got my cell phone. So I wrote my whole story on the cell phone, ran down to the track when the race was over. I'd left space, went to the driver that won the race, got 3 or 4 quotes from him, typed it in right in there, emailed it into the.
You typed everything out on
as
your
he
cell phone?
As he spoke, I was typing his quotes right on into my cell phone, right in where they were going to go in the story, and then as soon as it was done, I fired it into the paper, and I had like a minute to spare till deadline, and the story got in the paper. So that's where technology has taken us. So, in one end, technology has really been a godsend to print journalism. Well, to all types of journalism. Just the fact that they can go out anywhere now and broadcast live and that sort of thing. But especially for print journalism, with that aspect, with the tighter deadlines, it makes getting a story in so much easier and quicker.
Why would the deadlines be tighter when you can? Because part of what I'm thinking is that the technology, I would think, should allow you to turn that around more quickly, and that you could use some of that technology to get the stuff in. And yet, if the deadlines are backing up earlier in the evening, why is it like that?
I don't know. Go ask a publisher. Now, I know exactly why it's happened at the Free Press, because when they closed the printing press in London, when Postmedia chair, CEO Paul Godfrey decided he was going to close the printing press to get rid of a few jobs and save money, because it's not even being printed by Postmedia anymore. They don't have to own a press. It was farmed out to Torstar in Hamilton at the Spectator presses. So now that paper has to be shipped to London, but they also have to clear the presses to print their papers there. So the London Free Press, Sunday through Thursday night edition, the last page has to be sent to Hamilton electronically, of course, at 9:30 at night. That is the deadline.
Wow. On
Friday nights, it's 10 o'clock because they realize, well, we should try to get some sports in, and with the Knights playing and that sort of thing. Because now they got to print it there. They got to get it off their press to get ready to print their own paper, but then they got to get it on the trucks to truck it up here to London. And then send it all out to be distributed up north, out to west, to Sarnia and Chatham and places like that. And, of course, we saw already this year, the first snowfall, the paper was late. The paper's supposed to be in the door by 6 a.m. That's what they promised their advertisers. Because most people, by 7 o'clock, they don't have time to look at the paper, or they may be grabbing it on their way to work, take it, grab it, throw it in the car or whatever, take it into work, read it on their lunch, whatever. I know my carrier used to come around 4:30 in the morning. Now I hear banging on my mailbox at 2:30 in the morning because I was a window open. So the paper's way early getting here now. But the problem was with the snowstorm, the 403 was a problem getting here. And so the paper, some people didn't have their papers till 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. So there's the first time that now the people are ticked off. And every time you tick people off with stuff like that, you get 1 or 2 people that cancel. Well, people keep canceling. All of a sudden, there's no reason to be having a paper anymore. And the problem there too is, you'll know this from working in radio with advertising, is it's based on the numbers that in your industry list the listeners, what you can charge for the advertising. Well, in newspapers, it's based on circulation. Well, Free Press has gone from 100,000 down to 50,000. Well, you just figure that what they can charge for a full page ad has pretty much been cut in half. Because I remember there was a time for a full page ad in the Free Press, it was around $8,000. Now it's down, I think, just a little under $5,000. I could be wrong by $500-$600 on those, but every time the circulation hits a certain plateau where it drops below that, then they have to cut the advertising rate. So, and I'm sure, I was just going to quickly say, I'm sure that's why the Free Press retirees all get the paper for free, because that keeps boosting the circulation numbers.
So back then to sort of where we started, let's suppose that industry was kind of where it is as you just described, and you were just getting more starting out or even mid-career. Would you have seen yourself trying to repurpose, in the blog world or the online world or going to books? Did you love it, the process enough of it to stay entrenched in it? Or would you think, and it's an impossible question, I understand that, Jim, but I'm curious because of, I kind of feel like it almost weaves its way, that the whole essence of it, the trips, the people, the the process, the frustration, but also the adrenaline of trying to make the deadline, the challenge of it kind of gets weaved into your DNA. And we've talked also about where I've asked you about how come, no book or anything like that with some of the things that you've done and seen and experienced. But I mean, do you think want to try to keep into that world in some fashion, or look somewhere else?
If I was still working, I was 61 when I took a buyout. They had offered a buyout. It's still the best buyout back then it was Quebecor. Of course, then it got sold to Post Media. But it was the best one they had offered. And I decided, just for health reasons, it was just driving me crazy there. I wasn't out covering stuff much anymore. I was sitting on the desk editing copy, which I wasn't enjoying doing. So I decided next time I was going to take it. It was pretty good. I got it sweetened a little bit. I took it. So that's 5 years ago, just about now. And but that was when like Twitter and all that stuff hadn't really surfaced. But now reporters, and I initially, when I knew what they were having to do, like they have to tweet. When Morris and Ryan, even the news reporters, well, even all the journalists, when they go to an event, the first thing is they got to tweet. They got to get something out there really quick on Twitter to show that, oh, we had that story first or whatever. Or you got your Twitter followers, so you're keeping them up to date on what's going on with the game or the news event that you're covering. So when I first heard that, I thought, oh my God, am I ever glad that I'm out of there? But now that I've mastered Twitter, and Morris Delacosta will always tell people that he's the one to blame for that, because he told me, Jim, you got to get on Twitter. You got to get on Twitter. Well, I finally got on it.
Oh, so he's responsible for that.
Yeah, Delacosta,
Thanks,
yeah.
Morris.
Well, same with Facebook, but it's the Twitter stuff. I think I could have handled that, and I think it would have just made it would have probably been if the working conditions weren't the way they are now, I think it just would have added to the excitement of the job, because you can get that instant, because there's people who can't be at the game. There's people who can't be in a position where they can listen to it on radio or watch it on TV, but they've still got their cell phones or their devices or whatever, and they can follow you on Twitter, so they know what's going on. So yeah, I think I could have embraced that. Because
now, it used to be that the paper was the brand.
Yeah.
Now everybody's racing to be their own personal brand, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
I guess it's a question of, did you love writing in the process of it enough because, and I say this with love and respect, I've always viewed your personality as plenty big enough to be your own personal brand. Well, if you can imagine, if you had your own site and your own blog and your own Twitter, and that you could present a story how you wanted, it's interesting to think about, isn't it, of how you might play in that world?
Twitter, I think, is more, because of the 144 characters, I think is more of just getting a piece of information out there. I don't think you can really kind of, unless you're doing these ones where it follows through like 5 or 6 tweets because you're going into continuing characters or whatever the heck. But I don't know whether I think you get the followers because they know you're going to break news, or they can follow you to find out stuff that's going on. I know when I first started, Morris Delacosta was always tweeting or teasing me, saying, "Oh, I got more Twitter followers than you," and I've never really looked now. But I'm getting people because I've been. Oh, I shouldn't be talking about this because I'm going through it'll be 3 years in March. I suffered a pretty bad concussion, so I'm still doing some physiotherapy for brain injury. And my therapist or physiotherapist, Kelly, she comes to the house every couple of weeks, and she says, "So how was it with Twitter?" I said, "Oh, I've been a good boy." "Yeah, right. Liar, liar, pants on fire. Donald Trump." Oh. Well, I have people in the United States that follow me now because of some of my Trump tweets. And I just put some stuff up yesterday. I found some pictures of the Clampetts pulling into California on their, on their Joel Jalopy. And I said, here comes the Trump family into Washington. And of course I tweeted every one of them at all the Trump. But my claim to fame is, and I don't know how this happened because I was actually taking a shot at him, but it must have been 3 a.m. and he read it as a compliment, or he just saw his name and thought, "Oh, I'll retweet that because that counts." Donald Trump retweeted about, I think it was just after the election, retweeted something that I had tweeted. So I can go to my grave happy now.
Really? That's your measurement?
Yeah.
In a desperate attempt to take you down a different road. Well, what about, you're talking about Twitter, but what about like a a blog format or something like that where you could have, as you talked about, told the story the way you wanted to tell it without the restriction of the inches or the deadline. That's the part I think.
Or an editor, or an editor who decides you can't say that.
What level of appeal might that have had, or does it even have? Even
not anymore. It's interesting. I've had people ask. In fact, I just got a call today from a friend who she's involved with a magazine, and she said, "Do you want to do some writing?" And I said, "No." When I first got out of the paper, I would get a call or an email saying, story idea, do you want to do this? And I'd think for 20 seconds, and think, oh, that'd be exciting. It'd be fun to go interview somebody again. And then I thought, no, I don't want to do it. I did it for almost 36 years. And so doing a blog, stuff like that. Now, if I was still in the business, maybe yes, because when you're in the business now, like the people at the Free Press, or like James Rainey and that they have blogs, but they do that on company time. That's they're almost expected. Well, I guess not expected, but they have to tweet. But a blog is kind of like a bonus if you do a blog. But it gives you that opportunity to write that story or get that stuff in that normally may not get in the paper just because of space limitations, that sort of thing. So it's another avenue, another vehicle. So I could have, I think I could have seen myself in my younger days, grasping that. But,
and you never seriously considered doing any kind of a book?
No, and I got so many stories, but I wouldn't know where to start. And I don't want to write it myself. Somebody'd have to sit there and take the notes and then write it, and then I'd read it, and I'd never be happy with it or whatever. I don't know. I'd rather just talk to friends about stories, and some of the stories I don't even think about. We'll be talking about something, and all of a sudden something will just click, and I go, oh yeah, this is back in 1972. It was interesting thing. I went to the London Film Festival. I know we're kind of bouncing all over, but what a great event that was. And Dorothy Downs and her group, I really want it to continue, and I want people to really support it when it comes around next year. It was just back in November. Some great films. I saw 18 or 19 films, and they were all great. Some were like good, others were great. And it was really it's not the Toronto International Film Festival by any stretch of the imagination, but for a small local film festival, there was some really good stuff entered in that. And there was a piece where some Fanshawe students went with some of the vets over to Holland, to the Netherlands, probably their last trip for these vets, because they're at that age now where they're not going to be able to make that trip anymore. And I was watching this, and all of a sudden I started crying. I thought, what is going on? But then I remembered, and I hadn't thought about this for so long. Back in 1972, 73, 74, when I wasn't down in the States umpiring in the minor leagues, I was over in Holland and the Netherlands as the referee-in-chief of the Dutch Ice Hockey Federation. Huey McLean, who had been involved with Canadian Hockey Association, or Canadian Amateur Hockey Association. The Dutch had always brought over a Canadian as a referee-in-chief, and they were looking for another one. So he sent my name, and they hired me. They didn't know I was only 21. They thought I was like 30 or 35. But I lived with a Dutch family, Jan and Miep de Boer. Well, I hadn't thought of them in years. Well, and I remember the stories that Miep always told me about when she was a kid during the war, that her family, it was something like 27 Canadian airmen had gone through their home as part of the underground to get them back to England. So when I saw this and the Dutch, the adoration that the Dutch people had for these Canadian vets, and they were interviewing them and stuff like that, all of a sudden it just hit me. I thought, yeah, this is. I remember me telling me this sort of stuff, and it was like, wow, and it just was so powerful, because you think back, for us the war seems like centuries ago. Well, for them, the war ended in 48, something like that. When they were liberated. It's not that long ago, and a lot of them lived through that. So there's just so many stories that I've got. As I say, I don't know where I would even start to tell these stuff, and I don't know how I got going on that.
Well,
see, I go off on my tangents.
It's one of the reasons why I've wanted to have this conversation, and probably several more down the road, is that you've always been really interesting to me for a number of reasons, Jim. But one is, we haven't got to the umpiring yet, and I want to before the conversation's finished. And I also want to circle back to how the sports writing thing, how you kind of got hauled into that to begin with. But you look at that world, sports and just all of the machismo and the BS and everything that goes along with it. But I've also perceived you as someone being really interested in, as you mentioned, film. And I know that you like theater a lot and the arts and, community and culture. Is it fair to say that you've got a lot of diverse interests?
Oh, yeah.
And how did you become like that?
Well, I think a lot of it goes back to my parents. Like, I still love, like, the other day, I don't know how we even got talking about this. Oh, about vinyl records. A friend of mine is a manager at a Source store. Says, do you have any vinyl? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I got 2 big Apple crates full of vinyl that I haven't listened to in years. But then it got me thinking about my dad had the old 78s, those Slate records. So you're probably too young to have ever seen it. You've seen some of those. Yeah.
I had a lot of 45s.
45s, okay.
Later,
but the 45s I think were plastic, but these 78s were Slate. Okay. It was basically old, and then it kind of developed, the material developed. But my dad had stuff like Benny Goodman and all that sort of stuff. And so I was always listening if he was playing it, or I'd even put it on when I was at home when I was a kid. So I always listened to that sort of stuff. And so that's where I enjoy all genres of music. I even like opera. In fact, I just booked a ticket today to go see Ben Heppner and Gene Stillwell and a few others that are coming to Centennial Hall in January. As soon as it popped up on Facebook, or was it Twitter? Can't remember which one. No, I got an email. That's what it was. It was an email. As soon as I saw that, right online, right away. And I've even learned how to buy tickets online.
Look at you.
So I know, eh? I hate paying that $4 and $5, but sometimes it's better than in this weather getting dressed and going downtown and then coming back. But so I love all genres. A couple years ago, a buddy and I went down to the ACMs, the 50th annual, down at Jerry's World, Cowboy Stadium, AT&T. We were fortunate enough to get tickets. We were way up in the nosebleeds, and I love heights. Oh, geez. Couldn't believe how high I was. But it was great just to see that stadium, but it was also great the largest, there was over 7,000, largest indoor, Guinness Book of World Records, for largest indoor crowds for a televised awards show. Over 70,000 people were in there. So there, people said, why would you go all the way to Texas, the Dallas area for? I said, well, why not? Like, I go all over for theater. I go to New York 2 or 3 times a year, although I haven't been there for a while. It's an escape. It's kind of an escape from the real world. But sports is that way too.
Well, I was just going to say, there's a thread running through all of this, Jim, is that umpiring took you all over to different places. Sports writing, and the way that you described it, there's a real human interaction. No 2 experiences are different. And then when you got stuck on the editing desk, you started your soul was suffocating a little bit. Yeah. So whether you're going to see a theatrical production or an award show or to umpire a baseball game, do you see what I'm getting at? And is that fair that there's a different sort of a human experience in geography no matter where you are? That seems to be the thread that runs through this. That seems to be a curiosity to you.
See, instead of going to a gym, that's what I like to do. Although I should go to a gym. But no, I haven't really thought of it that deeply before, but yeah, I guess it all does, as you say, that it has that thread to it. It's interesting because people say to me also too, like, why do you like live theater? Not only from an entertainment standpoint, but I always say, a baseball player can go up to bat 3 times in a game. Take that as 3 times. He strikes out twice, gets a base hit. He hits .333 for that game. He's had a great game. If he bats .333 for the season, that's a tremendous batting average. Theater actor, they go on stage live every night, 8 shows a week in New York, or even here at the Grand Theater, or little like London community players, or at the Arts Project, or any of that sort of stuff. Every night you go on stage, you got to be batting 1,000, because that audience, because that's how word of mouth, that's how advertising is done for theater. It's word of mouth. So if you have a bad show that night, you have 50 people, 20 people, 1,500 people that leave the theater that night, and they go home and tell their friends, don't go see this show. It's a bad show. So they have to bat, live theater has to bat 1,000. Hollywood actors, and you'll hear this from most Hollywood actors, have started out in theater. Like Rachel McAdams from St. Thomas, she started out with Original Kids Theater Company on stage live. And a lot of them do eventually come back. Like Jake Gyllenhaal now is back. He's been back to Broadway, that sort of stuff. And they will say they still love, they crave that experience of live audience, live interaction, feedback right away. But they also love that feeling of the butterflies, knowing that, man, I gotta bat 1,000 this night, or boom, our reputation, the show's reputation, just not the actors. Where they say when we do a movie, we could do 47 takes in one thing till we get it right. Well, live theater, they don't have that opportunity. They don't say cut, take 47. But
I've never thought about it before, Jim, but you make some really good points, and a lot of these things are making more sense to me. And I'm thinking too about your umpiring. You wouldn't want to have the same success ratio there as a batter would, right?
No, you don't want to be 30. You want to be 100%, which it's tough. You can't. In amateur baseball, you can't. Now, professional baseball, you can now because they get the replay.
Yeah,
so they can get it. But it's funny that the replay is showing that the umpires are right most of the time. Sure, there's the times where they are wrong, but some of the stuff that's being overturned, and I understand why it has to be overturned, but it's that fraction of a hair, or that glove lace that just touches the leg, or the foot comes off the base by 1/8 of an inch just as the guy's holding the tag on him. And I hate, but anyway, the umpiring, no, you gotta, and you want to be, but I was the same way when I wrote. I was tough on myself. I wanted to be a perfectionist. I still remember one night I was covering the Tigers in it was the World Series against San Diego. And I woke up in the middle of the night in San Diego, and I'd realized I had said the wrong first name of one of the Tiger pitchers. And of course it got in the paper that way. But I just shot up like at 3:00 in the morning and went, I won't say the word here, but it was like,
I remember a time when I was working at the racetrack, and you were covering it primarily. And one of the more vocal of the team owners suggested to you that you had misquoted him. And I was really struck by how personally you took that. And I remember, Jim, and I admitting to my naivety with this, but really not understanding from my perch why that was such a big deal. But it struck me that you really didn't like that, and went to great lengths to try to understand where the misunderstanding was, and I don't want to say defend what you were doing, but it plays into that, right? That the integrity was really, really kind of like having a bad night, sort of like maybe on the theater stage. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're accused of just making stuff up or not having integrity of something that you're putting in print, that's a really difficult thing to gather back, isn't it?
So I'm trying to remember if that incident, I know exactly what one you're talking about. I remember the driver, and we didn't talk maybe for a couple of years. Well, then all of a sudden, a couple of years later, I'm in the pits, and that driver came up to me and started talking to me. And I was like, whoa. Everything was fine after that. Then his son started, anybody who follows Delaware, I'm sure they could probably try to figure it out, but and that team owner and I, we became, I wouldn't say friends. We didn't hang out, but we had a great relationship again.
Mutual respect.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. But because for me, if you're being accused of misquoting, that's basically saying, well, you lied. And I always tried to make sure that I had the quotes right. Initially, when I started in the business, all we had was that notebook and pen. But I think that so-called misquote, and I wanted them to listen to it. They wouldn't. I was taping I had a little tape recorder. I would tape everything because I wanted to get the quote right. It also made it easier to do the quotes when you got back up to the press box or whatever to transcribe it than trying to read your hen scratching. And you always, when you're writing in a notebook, you're always going to miss some words and things like that. Or you may miss the tail end of a great quote because you were still thinking of what they'd already said like 30 seconds previous, that sort of thing. So that's why I started using the little tape recorder. And they always knew I had a tape recorder because I would hold it there. And I'm positive on that one that I had used a tape recorder. And I said, do you want to listen to it? And there's just a perfect example of that was Ryan Pyatt went through the same thing with the London Knights a couple of years ago or 2 or 3 years ago on a situation. And they basically said, no, we're going to believe what this person says that's not what he said. Well, Ryan said, I've got it on tape if you want to listen to it. No, we believe him. Wow. So anyway, it just gets petty. And I learned as I went along, you know what? Okay, you say that, fine. I'll go talk to somebody. There's 100 more stories out at the racetrack if you don't want to be. I think it just got to the point where they realized they were still a pretty good team, having some good success, and they weren't getting any ink on it. But I would still find ways around it. I'd still write that they won a race and and that sort of stuff, but I just wasn't going to do the feature stories on them and that stuff. And it wasn't I wasn't holding any grudge. I thought, well, why should I put myself through this?
One of the things that I didn't understand until probably recently relates to, I think, Jim, a bigger communication failure that we just have as people, and that's understanding that you and I can be looking at the same thing here, even just in this room, and it's the same thing, but we're interpreting it through our own ideas, upbringing, experience, whatever it might be. When I was managing the racetrack, I remember, first of all, I was always astounded because I remember watching you just sort of scribbling stuff down in the middle of scrims and whatnot, and you'd always have it right. And I'd think, what is he writing? Does he have a shorthand? He can't possibly write that fast. That's a compliment in a roundabout sort of way. I always marveled at how you did that. But I also felt like you would write articles about things that for a very short window of time that I was involved in from my role as the short time as manager. And there would be, I'm trying to think of an example of a story. I guess it doesn't really matter, but I sometimes, and this only happened 2 or 3 times, where I would read it and I'd say, well, it's correct, but that's not exactly the way I see it.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you see what I'm getting at?
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't until much later, and this I think gets into where we've been over the last 45 minutes, is that, when we boil everything down to just sort of 140 characters, or whatever, it is an expression of your own perspective and your own experience that, you hear the phrase taken out of context. Well, you could get the quote right, but everything else that goes around it is kind of an expression of your artistry and your vision of what you're seeing. You see what I'm getting at here?
Yeah. What's exactly, like you say, you look at something like that beautiful Shane Norrie $650 pottery boat or clay-fired boat sitting on that table.
Yeah.
You could look at that and go, God, where'd he get that? Dollarama? But no, it's the old quote, it's all in the eye of the beholder.
But that's probably where we draw our connection to the writers that we feel, and some of the broadcasters even.
Yeah. What game were you watching?
Yeah.
Well, that game right there. But again, it's how you, and depending too which team you're cheering for. A lot of times too, that all comes into play, or which driver, if it's talking about the racetrack, which driver you like, which driver you hate, whether you're a manager or another competitor, that sort of thing too. Like, but and that part of the business has not changed, because I know the people still work at the Free Press, and they're always getting, now it's not so much phone calls anymore, it's emails or even Twitter stuff or on Facebook. You blankety blank, how could you write that? Well, that's exactly what happened, but it's how you've seen it. And of course, just as an example, and not to pick on the London Knights, but this goes on all the time, no matter what beat you're covering. But somebody could take a two-handed whack. Say a London Knight player takes a two-handed whack over an opposing player's head, and you write that? Oh, the Knights management is on you. How could you write that? That's not what happened. Well, watch the replay. Yeah. But anyway, no. But I learned after time just okay, fine, whatever. I'll just move on. I'll go find somebody else to write about.
Well, let's go back then to fill in the blanks of how did you get hauled into it to begin with?
Okay. When I was 14 years old, my dad, even going back further than that, my dad was from Kitchener. He had gone to school with Milt Schmidt, the old Kraut line, Milt Schmidt, Porky Dumart, and Bobby Bauer. They went on to play for the Bruins, and they called them the Kraut line because they were from Kitchener, and so I was always a Bruins fan. And then I found out later on that my dad had also gone to school in Kitchener with Frank Adveri, who was a National Hockey League referee and probably one of the best. He's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And so I got this, when I decided when I wasn't that good of a player anymore, I was a hockey goalie, but I was a sieve. And I was a right fielder, and I got bored out in right field. So when I was about 14, I was always out refereeing the road hockey games with my dad's Acme Thunder whistle from when he was a Mountie. Became a Mountie, got shipped overseas right away for the war, never went back to being a Mountie. But anyway, so I always wanted to be the boss, this I guess the authoritarian guy in me or whatever. So I was 13 or 14, I was playing right field. I was out there squatting down, hands and hat on top of my head, or a glove on top of my head. My dad calls me and says, "You don't look like you're having a very good time." I said, "No, I'm bored." He says, "Okay, go home and find something else to do for the summer." Well, the umpire in chief just lived over the next street over. Well, he was umpiring the game. We had it was old Veterans Land Act area it's basically out the Southdale, Wellington Road area. All that stuff out there was all pre-City of London. It was township, Veterans Land Act. The veterans could get the land for really cheap. And so that's where I grew up. So we had a 4 or 5 team league, just basically a house league, but it was some pretty good baseball. So that's where I started umpiring. Well, the next night I show up at the field. Well, the umpire in chief called me that night and said, "You want to umpire?" I said, "Okay, fine." So I showed up the next night. My dad said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm the umpire." So that's how I got my start into that. Well, then I continued on. I got into the London District Baseball League, or what was called the London Suburban Baseball Association back then. Then I got into the intercounty. I was actually doing the intercounty when I was like 17, 18 years old. And then there was a scout for the Tigers, Reno Bertoria, that lived in Windsor, and he had seen me umpire a little bit. And he says, "Have you ever thought about going to the umpire school down in the States? That you'd go to that for 6 weeks, and then they'd select umpires to go work in the minor leagues from that." And I hadn't really thought about it. Well, he put my name in, and all of a sudden I get this invitation. So the February of 1972, I loaded up my mom's green Ford LDT, and off I went at 21 years of age down to St. Petersburg, Florida, to pursue a career I'd never even thought about doing. It was 6 weeks. I learned later that 1,800 people had applied. 82. I think it was 82 of us started the 6 weeks. 72 or 71 of us finished the 6 weeks because it was a tough 6 weeks. It was almost like a boot camp. I remember John McSherry. He was the umpire in the National League, the big guy who had the heart attack, and died at home plate, Reds and Expos home opener one year. He was on me. He called me Mrs. Cressman all the time, and I hated him. But it was later on when I met him, or not met him, but I saw him again. He was down in Philadelphia, and I was in AA at the time, and we got rained out. So we went down to Philly to see the game, went into the umpire's room after because John, he was nicknamed the Whale because he was so large. And he calls me Mrs. Cressman. He says, "Mrs. Cressman." And I said, "It's Mr. Cressman now." And he came over and he gave me a big hug. He said, "I'm so glad you made it," because he said, "I was all over you just to see if you had what it took." And I always thank him for that because I didn't give in to the pressure. But anyway, 27 of us got jobs. So 1,800 applied, 27 of us ended up getting jobs. So I was in the minor leagues for the 4 years. I was rookie ball, A-ball. My third year I was into AA. Fourth year I was AA. Fifth year I heard that I was on a list for AAA. But then U.S. Labor Department, very protectionism back then. That was 72 through 75. But the U.S. Labor Department just wasn't going to issue my work visa again. I would later find out, and I've got some regrets, but you can't look back. Marty Springstead, who I got to know really well, he was an American League umpire. We had him into London a couple of times for the Sports Celebrity Dinner, which I'm still involved with as the guest speaker. He told me that when he took over as a supervisor for the American League, he was going through some old files, and he said my name was in there, and that meant that I guess the American League had seen me umpire in the AA, and they were aware of me. So I'd like to think that maybe I would have made it to the major leagues, but again, you can't have those regrets. So in the meantime, I had already done the 2 years when I was over in Holland. I didn't go back, but then I was working out at Fanshawe College in the off season, supervising one of the gyms, plus doing for the athletic department, or for the student union. I was doing sports information. It was just a part-time job back then. And I got to know John Vormatag in the summer of 75 when I first didn't go back to the States because of the work visa issue, but eventually it was granted. And he was a sports editor, but he also coached the Oak Ridge Tyke team. Well, Craig Simpson, who of course went on to play in the NHL, was one of his players, and so that's how I got to know Craig and the Simpson family and Christine and that. But John called me in March of 76, because the Free Press had been following my career. They did a story. I wasn't going back to the States. And he says, "You want to come in and answer the phones on Friday night? We got a couple of people who are sick." And I said, "Well, I'm supposed to goal judge the London Knights game." I always remember his quote. He said, "You want to be a sports writer, or you want to be a goal judge, or do you want to be a sports writer?" And I said, "What time do I start?" I'd never gone to journalism school, but I always liked writing. And so I guess I'd showed with my writing of press releases and stuff like that. And so I started answering phones on a Friday night, March of 76. And I left there December the 2nd, 2011. So I worked into a full-time job. I was full-time temporary within about 2 months of working there because he just decided, this guy can do it. And then 2 years later, I got on permanent staff. So long story short, that's how I got into the Free Press. I was just going to quickly say, everything I've gotten out of life has come through sports in some manner, but especially with baseball. Baseball has been, that's why I've always kept with the umpiring. This next summer will be my 54th year on the field. I've been around the world. I did the Olympics in '88 in Seoul. Baseball Canada sent me over there. I did the Worlds in Italy in 1998. I've done other Worlds that were in Edmonton, but those are two great trips. But the sports writing too. I've covered, as I said, I've had some great things that I've covered in sports. One of the highlights, I think, still was when Underhill and Martini won the World Pairs Championship in Ottawa after they had the disastrous Olympics that year because she'd had a problem with her skate blade. Then they come back and they win the Worlds up in Ottawa. But there's just been so many things that I've covered. But it's all because of sports. But I think it's been because of that thread that you talk about. That it's just all so interconnected. I just finished a run of a few weeks ago, and the History Boys, Calathumpian Theatre Company, a new group started by John Geary and his wife Evelyn Graham. Art Fiddler and I got involved as marketing. A couple of people dropped out of the show. John says, why don't you step in and do one role? I was a British parliamentarian. I just stood there, no speaking lines. Top of the second act, I was a BBC Two director for a film. I had like 8 lines to deliver. I was scared crapless that I was going to forget my lines. But once I got on stage, it was like, yes. And there's nothing like standing out there at the end of the show and seeing people give you a standing ovation. Not me, but the cast, because it was a great show. Alan Bennett, Olivier, Tony Award winner. In fact, James Corden was in the West End, and then when they came to Broadway, James Corden was in that show, The History Boys, and that was his first introduction to the United States. Of course, now he's on the Late Late Show. But there's nothing like standing there and hearing that applause, especially for 53 years of hearing nothing but boos as an umpire. And I'd been a hockey, as I said, I was over in Holland, a hockey referee. But so I look back again. I'll just bring up the fact that maybe I might have made it to the major leagues, and would have been nice because God, they make a lot of money.
Well, so I was going to ask,
but I wouldn't know you. And I tell so many people, if I had got to the major leagues, I wouldn't know you. I wouldn't know this. I wouldn't have been able to do this or that sort of stuff. So,
well, I think any of us can probably look back like that one way or the other, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I know I certainly can. On one hand, I can tell you things that I definitely, if I were faced with the same choices again, knowing what I know now, I would choose differently. However... You can't. No. It's a different context now, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I was going to ask you though about how do you become so addicted to an experience where you were absorbing so much venom just by stepping onto the field or into the arena? Meaning the umpiring for those that aren't following along. I mean, because you would have to have a really thick skin, and not to say that you would crave it, but there must be some sort of mechanism where you're able to either feed off it or sort of enjoy the adrenaline of the moment. Or how did you manage that?
You're right on all those. Yeah, it helps you do. You always want to. You can't be perfect, but you want to be as good as you possibly can, and I think that helps drive you. But I think that's like anything, any type of job, because your boss is over your shoulder and you're not doing a good job, he's going to be on you. So you're umpiring a baseball game or whatever, the fans are, you're writing about racing and you got an owner and a driver ticked off at you. Like, so it just drives you to make sure that you're doing, and I mean, but you also reflect. Like if I'm doing a ball game and players or manager or whatever, and they're yelling at me or something like that, I'll think back, geez, did I miss that call? And if I did, but 9 times out of 10, if you miss a call, you don't need somebody to tell you. But then you start thinking, okay, what positioning could I get into next time to make sure I don't miss that call, that sort of thing. But you just, after a while, you start to tune it out. It's like you hear the players say, we don't hear the fans. you're in the middle of a game and all that emotion and adrenaline is going. You're concentrating on what you're doing, and you're not going to really hear. You hear, but you don't hear the individual voices of the criticism. Sure, if you got 5,000 people booing you, you're not gonna miss that. But but if it's something you enjoy and it's your passion, then why not?
So how similar were the feelings to somebody challenging you of either misquoting or writing something inaccurate compared with a manager or a player or somebody maybe challenging your ability or integrity as an umpire?
No difference, exactly the same.
Really?
But I think that's the human nature. We want to get stuff right when we do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what. And if that's not driving you to get better or to succeed or whatever, then man, I guess you should go find something else to do. Like if you don't want to get better, because I always, if I messed up, as I say, if I messed up on the ball field, or if I messed up in writing, I'd always go back. How did I do that? Was it sloppiness? Did I, whatever, or maybe you did screw something up that you misquoted at somebody or something like that, and you go back and really look at it and say, okay, I want to make sure that I don't do that, or how can I make it up to them if I really did do something like that, which I didn't do too often. It's just like when I'm umpiring, I don't miss many calls, but
I'm going to kick myself if I don't ask you to tell at least one story from those days. I'll give you a second to think about it. That whole area fascinates me, and I think I mentioned to you when we were texting a couple of weeks ago that I just read the book by Durwood Merrill, who was a major league umpire for a long time, and was
Durwood was at school in 1972 when I was there.
I was just going to ask how close that era was, because he talked a lot about McSherry and Steve Palermo and all of those people as well.
Because Steve Palermo was a student, John McSherry was an instructor, but Palermo, I knew Steve, or know Steve. I haven't seen Steve in years. Of course, Steve was the umpire in Dallas after a game. They were at Campisi's Italian restaurant. And one of the waitresses had left that night, and she got attacked out in the parking lot. And Steve and a former football player gave chase, and Steve got shot and was paralyzed. Never was able to go back on the field to umpire. But he's working for the commissioner in the umpire department, rules department. But
so you were in that same group with those
Durwood.
two guys?
Oh, but Durwood, we know Durwood lied about his age.
Well, just if I can interject for a sec, if you want, because you talked about how grueling it was.
Yeah.
If you have any interest in that at all, read Durwood Merrill's book, because he goes into great description about that time and what they put you guys through for people that want to explore that further. Anyway, please continue.
But so anyway, Durwood's claim to fame was, and I there was one time when I was driving down to Dallas to visit my late friend Steve Story, who I met at umpire school in 1972, and Steve had played for Bear Bryant at Alabama. I got to meet Bear. It's amazing. I don't even think of this stuff. But we were driving to spring training one year because I flew down to Dallas to do some early spring, like February, high school and college baseball, and then we drove over to Florida for spring training. So we made a detour to Tuscaloosa, went to Bear's office. There he was. I got to meet Bear Bryant. But Durwood, one time when I was driving down to Dallas to visit Steve, I saw the sign, the exit for Hooks, Texas. And I thought, I got to drive into Hooks, Texas, because that's where Durwood is from. But he coached high school football in Hooks, Texas before he went to umpire school. Even though he said he was 22 when he went to umpire school, we figured he was like 42. But he coached Billy Sims. And Durwood would always say that till the day he died. That was his claim to fame. It wasn't that he was an American League umpire. It was the fact that he coached Billy Sims in high school. And look what a great football player he turned out to be, despite me. But Durwood had a great sense of humor. But yeah, it was 6 weeks it was like a boot camp. It really was, because they wanted to see if you could. I couldn't even shine my shoes properly. That's how nitpicky they were about everything. But they wanted to see, as I say, John McSherry saw something in me that he thought this Canadian might make an umpire someday, or might make an umpire right now, that sort of thing. So he just was constantly on my butt. And but it was just to see if you could take it, because once you get to even in the minor leagues, it was tough. But once you get to the big leagues, oh man, it's not so bad anymore, because they don't do because of the replay. The replay helps. That's really diffused a lot of those big arguments. But before the replay came along, man, you saw the nose to nose and all that. And Billy Martin, when he'd kick dirt, or sometimes he'd kick dirt an umpire and his spikes would catch the umpire in the shins and that sort of stuff. Unless it was a plate umpire and Billy wasn't that smart, he'd be kicking him in the shin guards and not know it. But never gave Billy any credit for being that smart. But yeah, no, it was tough. But again, if you like it, like you put all that stuff aside and you suck it up.
There has to be something that maybe would come to mind, especially from those first few years in the minor leagues. It was a situation that. Can you think of a story that you didn't know how to, or the timing was bad, or the crowd was unruly, or what comes to mind?
Oh, there's a lot of. Well, there's a few stories, but the one that always comes to mind. I was in. Would have been 19. It was my fourth year or third year in the minors. I was in the AA Eastern League, and we're in Reading, Pennsylvania, and I'm on the bases. And there's this fan, and I made an out call at first base or whatever, and against the Reading Phillies, and the fan didn't agree with the call, and he's on me. In between innings, he's right down at the rail, and he's just screaming at me. And finally, I don't know, the children might want to close their. It's nothing bad, but anyway, you could. So I look at him and I said, "Hey, is your wife here at the game with you?" He says, "No, why?" I said, "Well, you better get home because there's a couple ball players missing." Oh, he tried to get on the field. They had to call the police. So after the game, we're in the umpire's room, and there's a knock on the door. I go to the door and open it up, and there's a Reading cop there. He says, "Can I come in and talk to you?" And I said, "Okay." So we went through the story, and did you say it? I said, "Officer, as a professional umpire, I would not say anything to a spectator like that." He says, "I didn't think you would." And he started to turn around, and just as he's going out the door, and he turns and says, "Great line, though." Knowing darn well, yeah. But we got outside that night to our car. Well, it wasn't my car; it was my partner, Dick Adams from Illinois. And there was 2 bullet holes in the driver's door.
Well, I was going to ask you if there was ever a time when you were scared at a stadium.
We had to call the police back again. But you know what was interesting is the cops said, "Well, they dug out the bullets, but were they going to be able to trace it or whatever?" But we were staying at a place called Santarelli's Motor Inn. You got to realize we're 50 miles north of Philadelphia.
Okay.
When I went back there with the London Tigers, this was really great. It was kind of a trip back. When the London Tigers, the first 2 years, I was on the road with them. And it was a AA team. That was never heard of. Even in AAA baseball, they only covered home games. They never went on the road. And guys that were in the major leagues were saying, "You should write a book." Like, yeah, no, there's another book.
Now you've transitioned back to sports writing, right? Yeah, when you were on the road.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I'm back. So I go back to Reading with the London Tigers.
Yeah.
But I want to look up Santarelli's Motor Inn and this sort of stuff. And so I'm asking questions, and they said, "Oh, you didn't hear?" And I said, "What?" And they said, "Well, the dad went to prison." There was a light plane landed at the Reading airport one night about 4 a.m, and the police swooped in, and I guess it was just full of marijuana or whatever it was full of. Well, but back to when we were umpiring, their son was just back from the Marines, or I think he had been in the Marine Corps. So we got back to the hotel that night, or the motel, Santarelli's Motor Inn, and we told them, but they had great pasta. Sorry. So we got back and told them the story about that. And the son said, "I'll look after that for you." Every night for the rest of that series that we were in town, which was like another 3 days or 4 days, we'd get in our car, and this dark, big old Cadillac, black, big Cadillac, would follow us to the ballpark. We'd come out after the game. There was the guy parked right beside us. He'd see us coming, get a little tip of the cap. He'd get in the car. He'd follow us right back to the hotel. We'd never asked a question. So here it is. That was 1973. So now 1989, I'm in Reading asking about the Santarellis, and I'm told about this airplane and the old man going to prison. And I go, "Okay, that explains the guy in the black Cadillac and the whole bit. 50 miles north of Reading, or 50 miles north of Philly."
I'd love to. Well, as you know, selfishly, I'd love to do another one of these where we do nothing but Eastern League stories.
Okay. Oh, I got some Tino Martinez stories and stuff. And some of the old London Tigers climbing up on the top of Tim Leeper. I shouldn't tell Tim Leepers because he's still involved, first base coach with the Blue Jays, but. Yeah, we'll talk some Tim Leeper stories.
I still think there's a book in there. But before we round third, as it were, what have you got still ahead of you that you'd maybe like to try or experience? You mentioned the theater experience, and what else is maybe on your mind that you're curious about?
I just saw somebody got, and he's like in his 60s, just got a birthday present. No, in his 50s, I think. Just got a birthday present skydiving. No, I don't like heights. I don't know. What do I want to do? Oh. I don't know. As you get older and you start seeing, like I just went to visitation for somebody that I'd refereed with. Now he was just turning 90. You really start thinking about, man, how many years you got left and what do you want to accomplish? But what can you accomplish as you get older and things like that? But I don't know. I don't know what. I think basically I just hope my body, like last summer. I'd only done a couple games in the intercounty, and I was running, and I tore my quad. That was like June the 10th. I was done for the rest of the season. It just didn't heal to the point where I could go back on the field last summer. So I'm just hoping that I'm able to get back on I'm not looking at going 55 years, 60 years, any of that sort of stuff. I just want to retire basically from umpiring under my own terms, not have an injury or my body tell me that's it. I want to go out there and say, okay, it's been fun. That's it. I had a good game tonight. And I'll just walk away. But I guess that's probably about the only. And I want to get lots of nice Christmas presents. No. I want to live long. If you saw my wine collection, I just want to live long enough to be able to drink my wine. No, I'm being silly.
Well, either way, I really appreciate you spending this time, and it feels like we've barely scratched the surface because I know that any one of these avenues that we might choose to pursue, there are tons of stories, and I do hope that you take the time to capture some of them because it's amazing how they do fade, don't they? As time goes along, and then all of a sudden something sparks them, and that's why stuff like this is a lot of fun, is because now we'll have a record of this. And,
I appreciate it, Kevin.
Yeah, and so do I. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
Thank you so much to Jim for taking the time to join me. That was a whole lot of fun, and I can see us doing that again and just picking one subject and going over stories. I'm particularly interested to hear more about the umpiring and some of the things that happened there. And also, when he talks about the Eastern League and the London Tigers, that was something that I really enjoyed when I was a teenager, and I would love to hear some of those stories, maybe at some point down the road. Thanks to you as well. I hope you'll stick around and subscribe wherever you might be listening to this show, whether it be on YouTube or SoundCloud or iTunes or anywhere else. I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment for me or for Jim if you want to say something to him, and rate or review the podcast if you can as well. Would love to have you become a part of the community. To get in touch, you can reach me at kevinbulmer.com. My last name is Bulmer. So kevinbulmer.com or noscheduleman.com will take you to the same place. All my social channel links are listed up there, and you'll also have the option to hop on our email VIP list at the website as well. We've got some nice bonuses if you want to do that. On behalf of Jim, thanks again for spending some time with us, and remember, the journey is the destination. No plan is all part of the plan. I'll see you next time on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.